Later on.
You can't do LBJ.
Because I think LeBron every time.
I'm not gay though.
Wait, what'd you have last,
You mean like
Casey?
if you didn't have like David Day on these like
Okay, settle in. Got a lot to get done. As we weave our way through the aisle and through Cold War, civil rights legislation, civil rights battles, the Vietnam War is escalating. What year? Jamin's always going to remember that Vietnam was a thing since about 1955 with the fall of everything changed with Dien Bien Phu. And the French were out, and then came, guess who? They were already there. The Americans. In 1965, that's when things get really hot when it comes to the battlefield in Vietnam. We are now in 1965, in the middle of 65. Every young man graduating from high school is facing the specter of getting that letter in the mail that says you have been drafted into the United States Armed Forces. Some young men noticed a difference when we talked about World War II. You had 16-year-olds forging their births and being fraudulent about their information so that they could go and fight in World War II. One generation later, do you know anything that might have happened when some of these young men were getting their draft letters? Anybody ever hear stories? Go ahead. Going to Canada?
trying to hurt themselves.
Hurting themselves so that they wouldn't be able to serve. Anything else they might do? I thought I heard something. Yeah?
I think it was the Vietnam War. My great grandpa went to Costa Rica.
So he went not to Canada, but to Costa Rica. Anything else? Maybe just literally ignore it, burn it. There were protesters that would all get together and burn their draft cards. Was it, well, real quick, because I just said we got a lot to get done. Think about this. There's a difference in generations, obviously, right? So World War II, there were no questions asked. The country needed you, boom. You were 16. A lot of them, they said, I'm going to pretend I'm 18 because my country needs me. I'm going to fight. So was it just a difference in generations and the values, whatever happened to the values of the greatest generation, to the baby boomers who are now called to serve their country? Was it just that, or you need to know what's going on in the 60s? There's a whole lot of turmoil socially, right? There's a whole lot of things going on, and people are starting to not trust. This is kind of the beginnings of not really trusting the government. And it's kind of weird how it's evolved the last 60 years, because you have this, if you talk to most people, hey, how much trust and faith do you really have in the national government? It's going to come out a low number. But yet, we say that, but yet, if you look at the last 60 years, how much more power and actual trust we've given them has greatly grown. Does that make sense? There's a big disconnect between what we say and what we do. Am I making sense? Like most people would say, they don't trust the government. But yet, if you look at how things have unfolded, it seems like we trust the government with a whole lot. We keep voting and say, yeah, government do this, government do that. We've even voted, hey, government, take care of my very health, my body, my existence. We don't trust them, but the majority of Americans thought it was okay for them to say, yes, you must get injected. With what? I don't know. Injected anyway. We'll tell you in 75 years. You think I'm making this up. This isn't made up. This is fact. And then they got sued again, and now they have to release their documents and so many. But yet we have that, right? We have this, like, we know that most people, government, who says, yeah, government? No, hardly anyone, right? But yet our actions, we give them so much power. So what's happened culturally, obviously, it's more than just, I don't know. Something to think about. What caused this change where these young men were burning the draft cards, running to Canada or Costa Rica, hurting themselves on purpose so they wouldn't have to go? August. It's the first time the U.S. goes on the offensive. In August, it's the first U.S. offensive against the first Viet Cong regiment, and it was successful. Remember what the Viet Cong were? Derek, tell us. You answered it yesterday.
They were Vietnamese people living in the South that were rebelling against the South.
Yes,
Fighting
they were
the
the,
rebels.
they were communists living in the South that were helping the North Vietnamese soldiers. Imagine how difficult this was for the American soldier, by the way. You're going to a jungle. You're going totally out of your element. There's really no way to prepare on American soil for the environment that you're going to be going into, right? So you're going into the jungle. You're facing an enemy, the North Vietnamese army, but then you don't know who the person next to you is your enemy. You go from one place to another, and there's these Viet Cong. They're not going to be out in the open about it. These are not even official the Northern Army. This is their own little operation they got going, where they've got their all over the place, setting up minefields. In November, by the way, this is on the news. This is a big thing. This adds to people's resistance to Vietnam. War is glorious, valor, heroism, right? My father is fighting the war. Yay, he's a hero. Is, you know, if you would have gone to the theater back in 1942, before the movie show, by the way, you'd probably go see a double feature. So you pay your dime and you would go see two movies. Wow. And before the movies, they would have like a newsreel, and it would show like a minute of, hey, this is what's going on in the war. But not like this. Every dinner, and the TV might be on in the background, and the news is showing 300 Americans got killed in November at a place called Drang. We're seeing American soldiers in the coffins coming back, getting off the plane back in Washington. So it was like, whoa, war's real. It's like we see it every day. Fighting to stop, like, the most incredible, right? This guy had plans to erase other races, a bunch of other races. So there was a common cause, right? Here there's like confusion. Who are we fighting? What? Why are we? What? So not everybody was on board. Television was a major factor in the 1960 election, and television's a major factor in people's thoughts about Vietnam. Well, of course, when I freeze it, that's when they don't have commercials. one day they were sitting in history class in high school. You realize the mindset you got to get yourself in here, right? You ever been in a locker room or something? Anybody ever been in a locker room for a sporting event? You're getting really, everybody's getting jazzed up for the game. Anybody ever been in that situation? Do we do that here? Like, are we allowed to get excited about competition, get fired up? Because, you know. So along with being in terrain that they can never be really prepared for, they're fighting against people that know the whole terrain, right? You got to take that into account. Like we're over there fighting in a place that we couldn't really be prepared for, and then we're By the way, trivia question. I do not know this for a fact, but who do you think's guitar is playing in the background there? Anybody know their 60s music? Yeah, probably. Doesn't it sound like? Yeah, instead of, hey, you go out 10 yards and cut that way and I'll throw you the ball. We're going to, enemies like, war is real. So you know what? If you just appeal to people's emotions and say, hey, there should be no war. Yeah, that's right. Wouldn't that be cool, Jamie? So why are these people in Ukraine fighting? Are they for war? I mean, war is awful. Oops. All right. Yeah, surely. Where am I? All right. Whoa. All right, moving on. How much time we got? What's a different time period? 20 minutes?
Yeah.
And that brings us to 1968. This is the last slide for JFK and LBJ. Now, I just put 1968, wow. And I hope you understand why I just put, I was like, what do I call this slide? I just called it, wow. With an exclamation point. Just in case you think that our culture today is crazy, 1968 was crazy. January 30th, another major event in the Vietnam War. It's called the Tet Offensive. Tet, what's that mean? T-E-T, that's what it's called. And it's like world famous for the last 45 years, or 55 years, 54 years. When you say Vietnam, one of the first things a lot of people think of is this late January, early February fighting called the Tet Offensive. Well, simply all Tet means over there in Vietnam is it's the celebration of the Lunar New Year. By the way, Vietnam, very close to what country? Really big country. What's the huge country that Vietnam's close to? Anybody? China, right? So have you ever heard of Chinese New Year? Everybody's heard of that, right? You guys know your symbol? Like, are you a snake? What are snakes? A rooster. Okay, so you have the Chinese New Year things that go along with that. Well, the Tet in Vietnam coincides with the Chinese New Year. So it's not going to be on the same day every year because it goes by the lunar cycle, not the solar cycle. You know the difference, right? The lunar cycle, a new moon every 28 days or so, a little more. That's why we call them that's why I call them months, moon months. So it's usually late January that we have this Lunar New Year. This is considered the turning point in Vietnam. Maybe not listen, it's not the turning point necessarily for who's going to win the war. It's the turning point for, okay, after this, most Americans are going to be like, oh, can we just, what are we doing? The Tet Offensive, there are 80,000 plus North Vietnamese with their friends, the Viet Cong, they're in the South, and they set up this huge network and they plan, oh, by the way, if Tet is a holiday and all Vietnamese celebrate Tet, what is the expectation of all the military leaders? Fight or no fight? No fight. You're not going to fight on, this is a big deal. You know, in China, Chinese New Year is a big deal, right? So same thing. You're not going to fight on Tet. Well, surprise, surprise. 80,000 plus their Viet Cong. They had planned 100 different cities throughout South Vietnam that they're going to coordinate an attack at the same time. This is going to be awful, and this is going to be again in people's homes on the evening news. Wow.
Today on the Daily Dose. Tet Offensive of 1968.
That was
During
Jimmy.
the Tet Lunar New Year celebration, in the late night hours of January 30th, 1968, the Viet Cong invaded every major city in South Vietnam. Planned over the previous 6 months, Viet Cong commandos dressed as peasants, using civilian transportation to assert themselves into safe houses set up in each major city.
Okay, just so make sure you're paying attention. Are you listening to what he's saying? In all of these cities, you had regular people, peasants. Hey, we need shelter. They're Viet Cong. They're infiltrating all of these cities, acting as if, hey, they just need somewhere to stay because they're trying to get out of the war. So they're in all of these shelters set up throughout all these cities in Viet, and they're waiting for the right time, and they're all going to come out of like the woodwork, so to speak. So you're an American soldier who you don't know who's who.
Tons of military supplies were stockpiled at secret locations in and around each selected city. When the attacks began, the Viet Cong's Tet Offensive took American war leaders and soldiers alike completely by surprise.
How would you assess the enemy's purposes yesterday and today?
The enemy very deceitfully has taken advantage of the Tet truce in order to create maximum consternation.
In Saigon, the VC targeted key installations, such as the South Vietnamese radio station and the American embassy, where the VC blasted a hole through the compound wall and took control of parts of the embassy. 5 hours after the VC entered the compound, almost all of them were dead. Each commando dressed in civilian clothes, They had been armed with American M16 rifles and rocket launchers. A villa on the embassy grounds was home to mission coordinator George Jacobson, who became trapped on the second floor when a VC commando entered his home.
What could you see from your window? Were the
Obviously, you know, VC stands for Viet Cong.
VC in the buildings?
No, I did not see any VC in the building, except that I knew that there was at least one VC in my house. I knew that he was on the bottom floor of my house.
You had quite an escape at the very end. How did that happen?
Well, they put riot gas into the bottom floors of my house, which of course would drive whoever was down below up top where I was. They had thrown me a pistol about 10 minutes before this occurred. And with all the luck that I've had all of my life, I got him before he got me.
Some of the worst fighting took place in the city of Hue, the ancient imperial capital of Vietnam, where the Viet Cong held out for more than 3 weeks of bitter fighting. At Khe Sanh in the northwest, American Marines were pinned down and under siege, dependent upon airstrikes to hold off recurrent enemy attacks. More than 80,000 Viet Cong soldiers infiltrated more than 100 towns and cities of South Vietnam, which made the Tet Offensive the largest military operation conducted by either side during the war. Hanoi had launched the offensive in the belief that it would trigger a popular uprising, leading to the collapse of the South Vietnamese government. But when the fighting was finally over, the North's Tet Offensive campaign would see 33,249 Viet Cong soldiers killed in action. And then it happened. The Tet.
How many did they send in? 80,000 in the surprise attack. So most of what you've probably heard about Vietnam is how awful it was and it was America's worst war. Well, you should know that while Vietnam goes down as certainly not a highlight for the American military or American success, it was not because of the American soldier. What they were up against, and after about 2 or 3 weeks, they had fought back all of these people coming out of the woodwork and killed almost half of them and regained control. So most of what you hear happened about Vietnam, because the other thing that kind of a cultural change was all the other wars America fought, who was leading, who were making the decisions? The people in the field, the generals, commanders in the field. That General Westmoreland, was he a George Washington type? No. Was he a MacArthur type? No. Was he a Patton type? No. The decisions made during Vietnam were mostly being made by people sitting in their, what's called, do you know what they call them? What kind of towers? Ivory towers in Washington, making decisions for soldiers that were fighting in jungles and they really didn't know what was going on. Instead of letting the field commanders conduct the war, our soldiers were constantly put in bad situations. Yet we still prevail. And by the way, when we get to the end of Vietnam, the question is going to be, did we win? Did we lose? Well, in Korea, we said, kind of ended in a stalemate. So did we win? Did we lose? At least the Northerners didn't take over the South. Sadly, while the U.S. soldiers were in Vietnam, the North never took over the South. But we'll get to the end, and we're going to find out that when Washington made the decision, not that it was a wrong one, to finally end it, the North Vietnamese went in there and slaughtered the South Vietnamese. Not while the American soldier was there, just so we know that. So people that say that the days of America's undefeated are over because of Vietnam, not because of the American soldier, if you believe that we lost. Well, there's one big wow from 1968. That's how it starts in January, with Americans having that in their living rooms every day, seeing the carnage from the Tet Offensive. A lovely year. Then we get, I've heard it pronounced Milei, The My Lai Massacre. The good, the bad, and the ugly of American history. How Americans often mistreated, although it went both ways, Native Americans, slavery, many things in American history that we can't hold up and say, yeah, proud of America for that one. Well, this goes down as one of the darkest days in American military history. March 16th, the My Lai Massacre, where troops were on a mission as they were going village to village to root out the enemy. And remember, they're in a situation where they don't know who's living in Vietnam, and you're helping them, or you don't know if they're Viet Cong. So they're going from village to village, making sure that they're not being controlled by North Vietnamese or Viet Cong. And on this awful day, March 16th, 1968, our troops were massacred pretty much the whole village, including women and children. I hate showing this one, but hey, you got to know the truth. Now, does this mean America is an awful country because these troops at this time committed these atrocities?
The bankers and I do this to make a living. We're too busy to do taxes. I love doing taxes for self-employed.
It's that time, tax time, your parents' favorite time of the year. Okay, as much as we love America, nobody can blame us for whitewashing our history.
Gentlemen, it was late in April 1968 that I first heard of Pinkville and what allegedly happened there. But in the following months, I was to hear similar stories of such a wide variety of people that it became impossible for me to disbelieve that something rather dark and bloody did indeed occur in a village called Pinkville in the Republic of Vietnam. In April 1968, I happened to run into Private First Corporal Butch Groover. He told me that Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry had been assigned to Task Force Barker to help conduct search and destroy operations on the Batongan Peninsula. One village area was particularly troublesome and seemed to be infested with booby traps and enemy soldiers. And the men of Task Force Barker had a special name for it. They called it Pinkville. One morning in March, Task Force Barker moved out from its fire base headed for Pinkville. Its mission? Destroy the trouble spot and all of its inhabitants. Any villagers who ran from Charlie Company were stopped by the encircling companies. I asked Butch several times if all the people were killed. He said that he thought they were. Men, women, and children. He recalled seeing a small boy, about 3 or 4 years old, standing by the trail with a gunshot wound in one arm, while blood trickled between his fingers. He just stood there, staring around like he didn't understand. He didn't believe what was happening. Then, the captain's radio operator put a burst of M16 rifle fire into him. One of the company's officers, Second Lieutenant Callie, had rounded up several groups of villagers. According to the story, Callie then machine gunned each group. Gruber estimated that the population of the village had been 300 to 400 people, and that very few, if any, escaped. After hearing this account, I couldn't quite accept it. Somehow I just couldn't believe that not only had so many young American men participated in such an act of barbarism, but that their officers had ordered it. I became determined to ask them about Pinkville so that I might compare their accounts with Private First Corporal Gruber's. Instead of contradicting Butch Gruber's story, they corroborated it. It was terrible. They were slaughtering villagers like so many sheep. Exactly what did in fact occur in the village of Pinkville in March 1968, I do not know for certain, but I am convinced that it was something very black indeed. I think that it was Winston Churchill who once said, "A country without a conscience is a country without a soul, and a country without a soul is a country that cannot survive." I feel that I must take some positive action in this matter. I hope that you will launch an investigation immediately and keep me informed of your progress. If you cannot, then I don't know what other course of action to take. Sincerely, Ron Ridenhour.
Awful, hey? War is definitely HE double hockey stick. So what would cause a group of young men just a little older than you to snap like that? Surely none of them were sitting in history class before they went over there thinking, hey, I can't wait to go over there and kill a bunch of commies or Viet Cong, including women and children. None of them ever thought that. None of them probably ever thought that a day before that. I'm not, believe me, there's no excuse. But tough for me to judge what that mindset would be. If you're a soldier, what do? You follow orders. And if the mission was to destroy these villages where intelligence was saying were full of Viet Cong and people that along the way, by the way, they mentioned in the video the booby traps that were set up, the minefields that were set up by who knows who, right? You know, the enemy does use women and children as cover for what they're trying to accomplish. This happens a lot. This happens now in the war on terror. They use women and children to complete their task because for 99.9% of American history, Americans do not hurt women and children. Never intentionally. Except all the evidence in this case points to the contrary. Somehow, this whole group got involved in that mindset that said that it was okay. Whether because I just had to follow orders or maybe pent up anger. I don't know what, there's such thing as post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know what happens. I can never I'd never understand it. None of us could unless we were there. But how did all of them kind of fall into this? Like it allowed it to happen. Again, the enemy knows that not like Americans don't do this, and Americans don't. This is awful, and it stands out because, you know, if you're from a Islamic terrorist organization, it's like, hey, this happened there, this happened there, this happened there, this happened there. Kind of common knowledge, not for America. The good news, what good news could come out of this? This sears so much into the American psyche and consciousness that even more than after 1968, when America engages the enemy, say after 9/11, this would never happen again. We'll finish pretty quick tomorrow.
That's wild. I never heard of that.
Imagine you're like